Today we are in week 2 of a 4-week series that is inspired from the yogic tradition. And I'll begin with the questions that I asked last week that sort of prompted this, and you can think about it a moment. Do you believe in spiritual oneness? Not sameness, but one power, one presence, one spirit that is the essence of all life. Do you believe in one? Do you believe in spiritual wholeness, meaning that the spiritual self is whole, and that wholeness is a state of being, a reflection of the one perfect spirit? Do you believe in the interconnectedness of all creation? Do you really believe we're connected in some way? And do you believe that God is love and that love is your essential nature? How many of you believe somewhere along those lines? I believe you all do. I don't think you'd be here otherwise. And so the question then is not so much of belief, but it is about application of that belief. It's about living out the ideas, the ideals, and literally becoming in truth what we believe in spirit. And so we're always talking about ways to help us do that. Well, I wanted to introduce you in Unity. We have roots in mystical Christianity. It's part of the bandwidth. But Unity draws from the truth, the spiritual essence and truth that can be found through many different traditions. Because after all, if there is one spirit, and if there is ultimate truth, should not many different things point us in that same direction? And so if we look to the Hindu tradition, which, by the way, the Vedas, those scriptures precede the Old Testament. So we're looking at the ancient Aramaic. We're looking at some teachings that are really, really old. And there's a word in that tradition called yuj, Y-U-J. It sounds like huge, but without the H, yuj. And it's the word we use today to commonly say yoga. But many, many, many years ago, when that word was used, it was synonymous with union, sacred union. It was to be in a state of having one's actions and intentions be in alignment, and even far greater than that, of having the individual be in alignment with the universal one spirit. And so they taught that there were 4 primary ways that one could practice this, and they all worked together, but that some people had a natural tendency to lean toward one. Maybe some people are changed through intellectual love reaching them, and for other people it may be an act of service. And so these 4 paths that we talked about last week, there's a path of action, and we talked about that last week, selfless service, meaning it's not about negating the self, but it's about learning to serve in a way that rises above what we call transactional giving and transactional actions. You know, much of our world, we do business transactions. You go to the grocery store and you get something, and in exchange, you give something. If you have a family, you divvy up responsibilities. We transact and negotiate, which is great. Those are business transactions. And there's also a whole nother level of giving that is called non-transactional or selfless giving, selfless action. It is to give love for the purpose of being an expression of love. To give generosity for the purpose of experiencing generosity, to give goodness, to do these things. And so we talked about that last week. If you missed it, it's on our website. You can go back and look at that. That was the first path, the path of service called karmic yoga, the path of action. Well, today, it's very fitting because it is Mother's Day, is the path of devotion. The word in the Hindu text for devotion is bhakti. Bhakti means devotion, a path of devotion. And so what this is ultimately meant to do and open up for us is that devotion would help us realize our true nature of love. It's not about anybody or anything outside of us. I asked the question this week, I put it out on Facebook, on 2 different forums, and I said, what is devotion to you? Like, what is it in concept and what is it in practice? And I got some really great feedback. Suzanne from Maui, Hawaii, who incidentally was one of the people when the water came through, she lost everything. And she responded to this and said, devotion is a quiet word. Saying and thinking it, I feel totally enveloped in the loving presence that I know as God, all that is. That's what she described as devotion. Keith, a minister in California, said, for me, devotion is constant awareness of the spirit of life, not missing a second of presence. Jackie said, for me, it's living in a sacred way, choosing to be on a spiritual path and being committed to that. Carrie said, devotion is a state of being that is a conduit to greater being. Many spoke about devotion in their own way, in their own words, and probably the essence of it was about a connection to a presence, a connection to love. And then in the devotion was a commitment of how to practice that presence connection. In the year 1892, it's a long time ago, the co-founders of Unity, the Unity movement, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, on December 7th, 1892, they had experienced such healing in their lives, physical healing, financial healing, but above all, they had experienced healing of belief. They really came to understand and know themselves as one with all that is, and to be instruments of that power and that presence. And they were dedicating themselves to that. And so they sat down together, December 7, 1892, and at the top of a paper they wrote, Dedication and Covenant. And they started it like this: we, Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, husband and wife, hereby dedicate ourselves, our time, our money, all that we have, all that we expect to have, to the Spirit of truth. And then they went on for what that looked like for them. That is devotion in action. That's a beautiful sentiment. I thought about it a lot this week because I'm preparing for a talk and I'm asking you, and I sat with it. And one day I just smiled because I said, you know what? Devotion is like love dressed in action wear. You go in a clothing store or go to TJ Maxx or somewhere and you go into the action wear, where you can stretch in those clothes, the kind of pants you want to put on when you go to mama's house to eat, or you go into a buffet if that's anything you do. It's like you want to be able to move around easy in action wear. Well, devotion is love dressed in action wear. And for me, the way I would say it is devotion is a commitment to love and to nurturing love's presence in my life. That's it for me. And for me, God and love are synonymous. If I am nurturing love, I am nurturing my awareness with the presence of that which I call God. And so it's a very unique thing how people approach this, but I'm inviting us this week to take a few minutes and then hopefully throughout this week for you to think about this. Now, the interesting thing about the word devotion is one person responded and said, the word brings up something to me. It can have a boot-licking kind of feeling. How many of you know that too when you hear the word devotion? It can have what I call yuck energy around it for some people, and for good reason. Because in our language and just in the way our world works, we make things believe what we want them to believe or what we think they should believe. So for some people, the idea of devotion can carry negative connotations or can be used as something to manipulate with someone. For example, some religious or communal contexts, devotion is associated with strict dogma, rigid belief systems, the idea of surrendering our personal agency to another personality or organization or a God that would require that of us. And you can feel how that feels. To some, devotion, they may say, well, that means that you should have unquestionable obedience and submission or subservience, hence, drink the Kool-Aid. Those kinds of things happen, unfortunately, in the name of devotion. Which is why some people, rightfully so, want to know, what are you talking about here when you're saying devotion? Sometimes devotion is also elevated to such an extent that some people feel like, well, there's no merit to critical thinking. Well, that's not devotion. Devotion does not devoid itself of wisdom or critical thinking. And then another way that sometimes devotion is used is it can honestly be a cop-out or an excuse, where an individual can be showing up what really appears to be inappropriate or standing for other people who are clearly doing things inappropriate and saying it's because they're devoted to something or some idea that requires them to do that. I would ask, is that really the level of devotion that you want to have? And even if we call it a devotion to God, for me, unless that which we call God is unconditionally loving in nature, and unless that God would require, if there is a requirement, anything of us unlike unconditional love, I would say perhaps we're not aiming high enough for that which we call God. Unconditional love means that no matter what happens, love is there, love is present in the midst of any and every condition. There's nothing that you could do other than close it out yourself. There's nothing that you can do that would cause love, real love, to turn around and run away. That's a powerful, powerful truth when we begin to lean into that. So today, hopefully we can reframe it and reclaim it a little bit, because devotion can be a path, and I believe it's a part of whatever your path. Devotion in some form, even if you don't call it that, will be a part of your spiritual path. And its ultimate aim is love, to lead us into sacred union, oneness with love, which is to realize the truth of who we are. So let's go with that spiritual devotion is a commitment to love and to nurturing love's presence. It's there to bring us into that sacred place of union. It unites a longing in our heart, and it allows that longing to be met. It lines up with other spiritual traditions: devotion, God, love. The scriptures say that God is love. The greatest commandment is what? Love. And that love is a felt sense of connection. When you're in the presence of love, just like I felt a while ago, and I feel that love coming from you, you can't help but cry. It just moves you. It opens you when you are in the presence of love. And devotion is about that. It's about helping open us to love, which is always present. And so how do we begin to do that? Well, there's as many ways to do it as there are people. When you look at some of the different traditions across the world and you think about how people actively seek to include devotion as a big part of their life, in Sufism, the Sufis twirl and dance as an act of devotion. Have any of you ever seen Sufis twirl and dance? It is magnificent. It is a true act of devotion. Buddhists pray and meditate. Catholics pray with rosary. Protestants pray and read scripture. Hindus practice namaste and chant mantras. Jews light candles and observe Sabbath. Muslims bow and touch the ground throughout the day as a devotional reminder and make pilgrimages. Native Americans bring up the sun every morning and practice honoring all their relations. Mystics meditate and aim to encounter every face as the face of God, as a connection of love and devotion. All of these are acts of devotion. And if you were to think about it, what is devotion for you? What does that feel like? For me, it's silence. It's being in nature. It's right here, right now, being with all of you. It's listening to music that opens my spirit. It's reading things that help align me. When I think of devotion, I think of a sunflower. You know, a sunflower aligns itself with its source. It aligns itself, and then throughout the day, it continually turns so that it is in alignment. It's receiving the nourishment that it needs. It's assimilating it. And you could say perhaps it's even being assimilated by it. and it's cultivating its seeds, its essence to share. It's a beautiful, natural representation of what love could look like, perhaps, would be devotion. Well, how can we begin to practice it in our lives? When I lived in Hawaii, I heard a saying that some of the more true to still the Hawaiian culture. They say that everybody needs 3 things in their life, that we all must have 3 things to be healthy and well and to be spiritually balanced. And they firmly believe these things are sort of like a tripod that establish us. I was reminded of these 3 things this week because I also believe you could see them as a tripod that help open us in our awareness to how we can relate to devotion. And they say that we all need 3 things. We all need something to love, we all need something to believe in, and we all need something to do. We all need something to love, to believe in, and to do. And if you really think about that, you in your life, you and I need love. And so all needing something to love, devotion is reminding us that what we're here for is to nurture love's presence in our life. Because when love really gets a hold of you, remember that feeling, or maybe you're right in the midst of it now, of when you just first fall in love, and I mean you are what we call head over heels in love. Didn't everybody look better? I mean, somehow or another, we were in this like a different reality. Everything looked better. Everybody smelled better. People were not quite as annoying. It's like love had us. We had just given ourselves to love, and somehow everything else seemed a little more gentle. Love changes you. There's a great meditation teacher named Tara Brach, and she's written a book called Radical Acceptance. And in that book, she tells a story about her son. When her son was 6 years old, his name is Narian. When Narian, her son, turned 6, she bought him an ant farm. And she said that 6-year-old little boy loved that ant farm. That if you've ever seen an ant farm, it's this clear glass you can see, and you put in ants, and the ants begin to multiply. And he would spend hours, she said, watching, because the ants, if you've ever spent time and observed an ant, especially in that kind of setting, they are smart creatures. How they move and they build and create, how they take care of one another. Well, little 6-year-old Narian had been looking at those ants. And one day, Tara picked him up from his school. And she said the minute he got in the car, his little face looked like he'd been crying, and he was clearly distraught. And she said, "Son, what happened? What's wrong?" And she said his little lip began to quiver. And he described that day on the playground, some of the kids found an anthill. And they made a game out of chasing and squashing the ants. And for little Narian, who had ants at home, he could identify, he had a felt sense of kinship. Do you hear what I'm saying? That caused him to feel something that the other kids had not yet cultivated. And so when he told his mom about that and started crying in the car, she said, "Son, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. And I hope you know that they just didn't know probably what they were doing." And she began to talk to him and help and draw it out from him. What is it when you feel the ants that you see? And he's like, "They're real. I like them. I know their names. They're nice ants." And she said, "Yeah, you've got a kinship with them." And she said, "Son, perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons you'll ever learn, because all through life, our job is to develop that sense of kinship with the ant and the tree, with the one who we really like to play with and the one who gets on our nerves, with the one that we understand and the one that we just go, I don't understand, with the one that looks like us and the one that we don't. That cultivating love's presence is about nurturing that in our life. And we know the way to do that is to place ourselves in love's presence. Because when you really place yourself in love's presence, the Heart Math Institute has told us that the physical body, it's called entrainment, that the heart has an intelligence that is amazing, and science now knows this. And when an individual is hooked up to devices and they bring the heart into what is called coherence, when their heart is full of love and free of judgment, the whole body physiologically changes. There's a science that shows us that. And our goal is the more time we can spend bringing ourselves and nurturing love's presence in our life, it literally changes us. And that's what devotion is about. It's a gift that we can give ourselves because we all need something to love. It's like, how am I nurturing love's presence in my life? That's the first aspect. We all need something to love, and devotion says, let's nurture love's presence in your life. Well, then the second one, we all need something to believe in. Something to believe in that would elevate our state of being. Something to believe in that would not want us to just get out and fight against and tear down, but something to believe in that lifts us up. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of people call it God or a higher power or universal oneness or peace or loving, compassionate equality. Whatever it is, we all need something to believe in, and to believe that that is calling us higher and calling us to it. And so to place ourselves in that presence. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Lisa Miller. She is a neuroscientist, a psychologist. She's an author. She has a few TED Talks out. She's a professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University. She said at the beginning of her career, while working in a residential mental health facility in New York, she was working at an inpatient unit with people who were in tremendous pain and had reoccurring major depression. These were people that had to be in care because their level of mental pain and depression was so strong. She said one day one of the older male patients with severe bipolar disorder asked if there were any plans to celebrate Yom Kippur. The doctor in charge just shrugged his shoulders and said, no, there's no service planned, and she witnessed that. She saw the patient walk out of the room with their shoulders slumped, and she said, I'm Jewish. I could do this. And something inside her stirred to such an extent, she wrote, and this is in the book, No Nonsense Spirituality. She said, Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the calendar for Jews, and so I took it upon myself to organize a dinner in the ward's small back kitchen. Among the many attendees were 4 patients who were typically agitated and highly volatile. However, as they began to sing and pray together those common prayers, something remarkable happened. Calmness descended upon the entire room. Smiles appeared on their faces, and they expressed gratitude. This was an astonishing, remarkable change in behavior, unlike anything I had witnessed during my entire time there. This had never occurred in any of their formal treatment. She goes on to say, in those moments, as they were experiencing that moment of devotion together, they were free of the cage of the limitation of their ego. They were free from their small s self, and they had joined the larger capital S self in the field of life, in the sacred connections. She said the effects were truly amazing, and they lasted. They lasted about 4 days. And she said, and then I noticed after about 4 days, every single one of them returned to that agitated type of behavior. And she said, so I knew in that moment that there was something there that I needed to delve into, and that guided her whole path. She has explored spirituality and how it changes us, how it heals us, and she's had remarkable results. She said, I knew that I needed to explore that, but I also knew that whatever they experienced is something we must be willing to sustain in our own lives. That it can change us, but it requires to believe in it and to continue to work with it. And so she began some of her studies. She would ask a patient, tell me about a time you felt a deep connection to God, to your higher power, to the source of life, to love. And she would record these patients when they would tell about a time. And then they would take that same patient when they were highly agitated, and with their brains being recorded, they would let them hear that memory back, and guess what it did? It brought them into coherence with the presence of love. It would change them again for about 4 days. And so the practice of taking ourselves in the presence of love, she said, I've learned over the years, whether it's a walk in meditation, whether it's a sitting meditation, whether it's a walk in nature, reading a sacred text, saying a prayer, gathering with like-minded people, it allows us to open up to the presence of love, which literally changes us and allows us to be that change in the world. Devotion, it's a powerful thing. We all need something to love, we all need something to believe in, and we all need something to do. As we express ourselves, self-expression is what we're here for. The purpose of an orange is to release its essence. Guess what? The purpose of you is to release your essence. How that looks for you, and hopefully at the core of that essence is love. Sarah, I'm going to invite Sarah and the band to come up. So devotion is our commitment to love and to nurturing love's presence in our life. Through our actions, our deeds, our commitments, placing ourselves in the presence. In the Puritan tradition, songs are often used. Songs were used in my house growing up. If my mom was ever kind of weary, I certainly saw my grandmother. My grandmother was she was as round as she was short. She grew up in Goldsboro, North Carolina, had a sandy yard, and she would gather these reeds and branches and bundle them together in a very Native American tradition. When she got overwhelmed, because she had 8 kids, and I was a grandkid, she had 8 kids and a bunch of grandkids, and she'd get overwhelmed. She'd go out, she'd say, I need to sweep the yard. And we all knew that meant grandmama needs space. She would go out and she would sweep the yard and just make the sand would look so pretty. But it wasn't long before she'd be singing, I know that I know. She'd be singing and dancing like this. And we were like, oh, grandma's getting happy again. She knew how to place herself in love's presence. Singing, doing those things, gathering with people. Well, we're going to use a tradition today of call and response. Now, one of the ways that we cultivate love in our life is to acknowledge what's not love and to make a commitment to turn from that. Just as that sunflower is continually turning toward the light, there's a part of us that requires actively turning and returning to love, which means the minute we find ourselves caught up, have you ever typed that email and then thought, oh, I better not send that? Or that post, and you just after you send it, you're like, oh, how quickly can I delete that? That was not very loving. When we find ourselves, it's to turn back. So this is a meditative chant. Sarah will sing it, and then all of us will sing it to echo. As you can, if you can listen to her and don't even have to open your eyes to sing when it's our turn, we'll do that. And if not, your lyrics will be up here. So I'm just going to invite you to allow these lyrics to guide you through some things to open to love. Here we go.
There is no holy war. There is no holy war. God's will for us is more. There is no holy war.
There is no holy war. There is no holy war. God's will for us is more. There is no holy war.
God has no enemies. God has no enemies. The way of God is peace. God has no enemies.
God has no enemies. God has no enemies. The way of God is peace. God has no enemies.
There are no chosen ones. There are no chosen ones. We're all God's daughters and sons. There are no chosen ones.
There are no chosen ones. There are no chosen ones. We're all God's daughters and sons. There are no chosen ones.
There is no higher race. There is no higher race. All children wear God's face. There is no higher race.
There is no higher race. There is no higher race. All children wear God's face. There is no higher race.
There's no one sacred land. There's no one sacred land. The lights wherever we stand. There's no one sacred land.
There is no sacred land. There's no one sacred land. The lights wherever we stand. There is no sacred land.
There's no one prayer to pray. There's no one prayer to pray. Each heart will find its own way. There's no one prayer to pray.
No one prayer to pray. There's no one prayer to pray. Each heart will find its own way. There's no one prayer to pray.
There's no one way to love. There's no one way to love. It's what we're all part of. There's no one way to love.
There's no one way to love. There's no one way to love. It's what we're all part of. There's no one way to love.
Now there is only love. Now there is only love. It's what we're all made of. Now there is only love.
Now there is only love. Now there is only love. It's what we're all made of. Now there is only love. I invite you to close your eyes. There is no holy war. God's will for us is more. God has no enemies. The way of God is peace. There are no chosen ones. We're all God's daughters and sons. There is no higher race. All wear God's face. There's no one sacred land, for the light is wherever we stand. There's no one way to pray. Each heart can find its own way. And there's no one way to love. Love is what we're all part of. And the true realization comes when we realize, now there is only love. I open my heart to love. I recognize that I need love. I need something, someone, ways to express my love. And I need to feel loved in return. May I commit to nurturing love's presence in my life, to noticing those things that seem to overshadow it, edge it out, keep me so busy or filled with something else. May I prioritize my life in such a way that I make it a practice to nurture the presence of love in my life, to place myself where I have a felt sense of love, to magnify that feeling of love, and to realize that if I have such love for the ones I have, that I can use that love to create compassion for all people, have love in some way, that we are either being an expression of love or in a state where we are crying for love. I commit to a path of devotion that will allow me to nurture the presence of love in my life, and to know that that is God, and that is within me, my being. So we give thanks for this presence of love. For now, there is only love.